All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money. Excited to be with you as always. I'm even more excited now because I am with Elizabeth at the studio. If you notice the
I
background,
know, Gofi, it's been a while.
I decided to come over and do this with you live here. So very 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 excited. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am very interested for this upcoming BRICS Summit.
Yeah, this is what we're gonna be talking to you about, guys, today, because you all know the summit is starting on the 6th and 7th, which will be Saturday, Sunday. But there are some key aspects. We're not gonna be talking about the details of the countries that's been added, and you all know that stuff. We're gonna be talking about what matters moving forward. There are two key things that we want you to pay close attention to. One, it has to do with the absence of President Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is not attending. That is a big significant thing. Of course, for the Russian president, we all know why.
Yes,
The ICC,
absolutely.
even though we know the double standard of the ICC, we'll get into that later. Second one that I'd like us to focus on has to do with the Donald Trump's threat for the BRICS members if they ditch the dollar.
Yes.
And that's going to bring us to talk about the gold, about the dollar status, and so forth. So this is what we have a great show for you today, because I'm very excited about it, and I'm also looking forward to hearing what you have to say on the economic front. It's because it's really a lot of stuff moving forward, and given what's going on around the world, makes perfect sense.
Well, and I think it's really interesting that you bring up the economics, which is what we do here. But on BRICS only matters because it's an economic bloc.
Yeah.
BRICS only matters because of the trade now between the global south. So we're going to talk about that a little bit further, but you're looking at the G7 countries that have 30% of GDP, and you're looking at basically the BRICS nations having 40% of GDP. So I'll show you guys the numbers a little bit later, but we have a very interesting power shift that's starting to happen.
Yeah.
And so, yes, let's dive into it.
It's very interesting to understand. Well, like I mentioned at the beginning, it is understood that the Russian President Vladimir Putin is not going to be attending because of the ICC. And again, this brings us to the credibility of the ICC. And to me, it was like it's as clear as daylight. So what makes one head of a government or prime minister, whatever you want to call him or her, better than someone else when it comes down to the law? You know, the letters of the law should be applied equally. So I am referring here, yes, I am not talking in riddles here. I am referring to Benjamin Netanyahu, that the ICC warrant has been issued on his arrest. Yet when he went to Hungary, he was not arrested there. So do I blame the government of what's his name, the head of Hungarian, Orban, Mr. Orban, Viktor Orban?
Yeah, Viktor Orban.
Was he weak? I don't know. But suffice it to say, you can have, and this is why the world is sick of this double standard of the international organizations, because we have influence over there. And that has to end. So we understand the case of Putin not attending the G7, the BRICS summit, but the case for Xi Jinping, and that even though I read this morning, some analysts from Washington said, "Oh, don't read too much into it." Heck no,
read a lot into it.
No,
read a whole lot into it. Yeah,
I have one particular theory about why he's not.
Yes,
going.
Please tell me.
And this one has to do with Brazil is going to host a state dinner for India.
Yeah.
How the heck would you even? I don't know who's advising the head of the Brazilian leader, Lula da Silva, but it's so freaking out of control for him to, do a state dinner for India at the expense of China. That just doesn't add up. Doesn't make any sense. I know the Chinese not gonna take it personally, but the optics of it. If you are Brazil, who would you want to trade with? India or
absolutely,
China?
absolutely.
I mean, come on,
absolutely.
It's common sense. And I became convinced that what will be other reasons for why Mr. President Xi Jinping will not go. Of course, if the Russian president is not going,
But he's still shown up to. He's still shown up. He's shown up
South
to.
Africa.
Yeah,
In
he's
South
shown up to
Africa,
South
he did.
Africa.
And Lavrov represented Russia. But now the optics of it, because you have two heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Those are two heavy hitters.
The two heaviest hitters.
Yes. And that is to me where, because now this summit, it's not going to have any.
Yeah.
It's what do you guys think? What do you guys think of really now the so-called success of this summit? Will it be successful or not?
Right. Without the two heaviest economic hitters, it's not. But ultimately, these summits are theater. They're show, right?
Yeah.
Because the things that are important about BRICS are happening outside of just the summits.
That's true. Yeah. But at the same time, I am really, I never thought I would say this, because if you go on a record, I've said the stuff that I said on the record for a reason, but I am now really starting to feel and sense, will BRICS live up to its potentials, especially with having India in?
Yeah.
I am 100% convinced. And again, nothing against India itself.
Sure.
But if BRICS to move forward, they're going to need to get rid of India and be careful about the countries they're going to invite. You know where the problem of BRICS right now? You know what it is? One of its major problems is lack of consensus. They can't reach an agreement. It's expanding. It is expanding. And that comes with that territory of, I got to sign. It's silent.
It came through your laptop.
Is it?
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, silence. And that is one of the problems that I'm starting to see moving forward, given that the world is already shifted to a multipolar.
Yeah.
So they have to have some mechanism inside BRICS by which, if a country is not willing to support the policies of the bloc, then it needs to be voted out.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It doesn't matter, a founding member or not. That's the way I see it. I mean, what do you think?
No, I absolutely agree. And if you really look at BRICS, what is BRICS' mission? Yeah. BRICS' mission, more or less, is to create an alternative to the Western world. It's a payment alternative, an economic alternative. And if they can't come to a consensus, it's nothing more than words. And I think that's really the big question right now, because BRICS has been around for a long time. But up until recently, they haven't exactly been relevant because they haven't been doing much of anything. Right now, they're starting to do things, but it is primarily China and Russia that are doing these things. Yeah. So, we have the addition of Iran, we have the addition of some smaller countries. That's all well and good, but we're looking at what will this actually amount to. And I do want to do another episode, David, let me know what you think about BRICS versus ASEAN. Because ASEAN does not seem to be. ASEAN has invited Vladimir Putin. They've kind of done some very interesting things, but fundamentally ASEAN is not BRICS. So I do want to talk about. We'll do like a whole show on that because it deserves a whole show. But really, we're looking right now at what teeth does BRICS have. Yeah. And I think you're right that India fundamentally isn't contributing in the same ways that some of the other countries are.
And that's why I am really perplexed as to why Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, will host a state dinner for India. Mm-hmm. What does India has to offer Brazil?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
And again, nothing against India. To some viewers, I know we have some viewers from India.
Absolutely.
I always say you talk negative about India. No. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the facts on the ground. Mm-hmm. Simple as that. What does India has to offer Brazil? So no, there is one thing for sure, and I'm going to share the link with you guys later on as to what some analysts are saying regarding, and I'll say it word for word. Here is what it says, and I quote, "It is unprecedented. No show that will be sorely felt, while at the same time raising questions about China's diplomatic priorities and possibly blunting Beijing's ability to advance its agenda at the summit," says analysts. Unquote. I disagree with that completely. Of course, China has its own priorities elsewhere, But on the other hand, you think about the makeup of the BRICS with the countries. And I'm now starting to question, given what just happened with Israel and Iran conflict, who do you think the countries that supported Israel against Iran? I'm talking about Arab states, including Egypt, including the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
And those are now, Egypt is part of BRICS.
Right.
Makes you just wonder.
Absolutely. UAE is part of BRICS.
And I'm starting to feel, the US wanted those countries in because they will do the bidding for the US,
right,
while the US is watching it.
Well, and so that's sort of what we're seeing right now is if that actually is the case, if Brazil and India, for example, are sort of doing the US's bidding more or less, that would make sense. It would make sense that Brazil would honor India above China. Although India and China, if BRICS is really going to be successful, and India does stay in, they do have to figure some of their own diplomacy out, don't you think?
Yeah, other than that, it's not going to move forward. And what you add to this now is the threat by Donald Trump regarding BRICS countries that they will be heavily sanctioned if they drop the dollar.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute, where this is all going. And that is one of the key aspects also we have to understand as to what could come out of this upcoming summit.
Yeah.
Like I always say to you guys, you always read the final communique of every summit, every whatever. Always read that final communique, because that's usually summarizes the key points on the agenda regarding the conversations.
Okay,
One of the key for this is that now, are those countries that's going to be meeting on the summit keeping in the back of their minds the threats of Donald Trump?
Okay, so let's dive into that for a second. So this is a Truth Social tweet from or post.
Yeah.
It kind of looks a little bit like Twitter, which is now X, everything, Okay. So this is from November of last year. So the very tail end of last year. The idea, and this is from Donald Trump's Truth Social, the idea that BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. They can go find another sucker. There's no chance that BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America.
Yeah.
So,
but it looks like that Donald Trump's threats sometimes work. Look what happened to Canada.
Absolutely.
Did you know Canada imposed the tariffs on the tech companies?
Yes.
But he threatened them and they lifted. They made a huge mistake. Now he's going to bulldoze over them.
Well, so this is a very interesting facet that I think we have sort of been talking about for a little while, and that is the BRICS countries, for example. Every country got tariffs, right? So when Donald Trump was doling out the tariffs, everybody got them, right? Or most countries got them.
Yeah.
But I think that this was one of Donald Trump's attempts to actually stop some sort of BRICS currency from going forward. And so, because you see this directly in the threat, 100% tariffs. Well, China got more than 100% tariffs for a while. So some of the tariffs are starting to really come down from China. And there is sort of a tariff de-escalation that's happened, which is fantastic. It's absolutely the right thing to do. But you're looking at the BRICS countries and they don't want the United States to go away as a market, as a consumer market.
Yeah.
They don't want to stop trading entirely with the United States, and they don't want to completely get rid of the US dollar. That's also not what's happening here. So the BRICS countries really have to pay close attention to what they're doing. And I think that that's a big reason that the BRICS countries are not very public about what they're doing right now, is because there is retaliation that is very possible from the United States. And we've already started to see that retaliation. I don't think the BRICS countries are interested in 100% tariffs.
They're not. But at the same time, you have to understand where this is headed. It's because when you look at now the dollar, the value of the dollar, which by the way, I looked at yesterday, the market, it dropped.
Yeah.
While at the same time, gold is going up. And
absolutely.
Some particular countries, including China, are amassing a massive amount of gold. They have been.
Yes.
It's not new. The Russians been doing the same. And for India, I won't count on it because its economy is not where it needs to be. I mean, we can talk we can't talk about India and China on the same sentence. That just, it's a reality, it's a fact. So that's the way I see it. So it makes you just wonder, are those countries now, especially China now sort of pushed back against Donald Trump, and Donald Trump found out. That's why Trump can get away with the weak states, including our neighbor to the north. I was talking to someone 2 days ago, a Canadian person, and I just had to mention this one, and I was like, you guys, I don't know what your PM did, Carney. I thought he'll take stand. You remember when he came to power? Oh, I'm forceful, I'm gonna push.
He can't.
He can't. So all of a sudden you find Canada just bowing to Trump, for that matter. China didn't. So this is why Trump is saying what he's saying about BRICS, scaring them, threatening them, because they're weak states, but couldn't do that with China.
They couldn't do that with China, but let's take a look at a couple of things, because you brought up gold. So this is from the World Gold Council, because there are a whole bunch of different numbers that are being more or less thrown around for how much gold each country actually has. But World Gold Council is like a pretty good way to like really take a look at that. So let's take a look at, first of all, the largest increase. So out of the Western world, the country that is actually increasing the most is Poland. Very, very smart. Very smart. And we've watched Poland do this for a little while. So they've been amassing gold. But the second is China. So let's take a look down here. It's interesting. Germany is actually losing some gold, but China, if you look at tons, gold reserve tons, it's 2,292.31. Okay, so that's what China has. And then let's take a look here at the United States. So this is from Trading Economics, and here is the gold reserve. We don't know if this is for sure what's happening, because there's actually a lot of controversy recently about is there physical gold in Fort Knox? Like, do we actually have this much gold, or is it just what the United States is saying that we have? Okay. So this is 8,133.46 tons as of March 2025. So there still is a really large gap between how much gold the United States has and how much gold China has, but also BRICS countries, because it's not just so
when you say BRICS country,
combined. Okay, so let me talk about that for a second. So the countries obviously that have the most gold are Russia and China. Okay, so China, this is sort of like the official number of how much China has, and Russia has Okay. So if you do the research, there's a big gap. Some numbers for the middle of 2024 say that Russia has 2,340 tons and China has, about 2,300-ish. But basically, collectively, that's somewhere around 6,000.
Almost 7.
But then there's other numbers that say it's less. So it's somewhere between 16 and 21% of global holdings between China and Russia. Okay. So that is a very large amount of gold holdings, and both are increasing rapidly. Okay. So I want to put that to the side because it's really important. It's important to know that this gold is actually amassing. They're collecting more and more and more of it. What does that mean? That means that whatever currency, first of all, that their currencies are and governments are backed by something, right? So gold is sort of the universal store of value, and it has been for centuries, if not thousands, forever. Not forever, but definitely for a very long time. It's been sort of the store of value. Okay. So that's a really important piece of information, is that China and Russia and the BRICS nations are amassing a lot of it, and they're sort of at the forefront of amassing this gold. in the Western world, the only country that is serious about amassing more gold is Poland. The rest of the EU and the US are not seeming to actively gain more and more gold. Okay.
Yeah.
So if BRICS were to create a currency, and they are amassing gold, because right now they have somewhere between 16 to 21%. But as they get more and more and more gold, that number will increase. The percentage will increase if the Western world is not also continuing with the amount of gold they amass.
Yeah.
Right? So it stands to reason that something that is a currency that is a BRICS currency, which is clearly being spearheaded by China and Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and then the other countries they just added are not spearheading this in the same way. If that were to happen, would it be possible that they would attach their currency to gold?
To the gold. Yeah. Because it gives them something tangible.
Right. And it gives their currency
value.
It makes it legitimate.
Yeah.
It makes it real. And it probably would not be a like one-to-one like attachment to gold, because a lot of economists have talked about if a BRICS currency were to happen, would it be attached to gold, because these countries are amassing gold?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it will make more sense. And this is why I think and it became clear as to why Trump issued that kind of threat to this country. Because when you consider the likes of certain countries in the Gulf, like I'm not talking about Iran here, I'm talking about United Arab Emirates, I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about some other countries that those are under the US control.
Yeah.
Make no mistake about it. So, this is why I'm like starting to really sense, and I hope I am wrong, will something tangible comes out of BRICS, because it's expanding, but expanding maybe for the wrong reasons. I have to say this. So, and I'm like, is there any strategy or plan in case, because if, for example, I even this morning, this might surprise you, literally, I was drinking my coffee and thinking about this, because I entertained the idea. What if Russia, China, Iran, and the likes will decide, you know what? We're going to leave BRICS altogether.
Sure.
But we're going to go and establish a new one. And I just played with the ideas in my head. Yeah. I know, I'm thinking outside the box. Oh, that couldn't be right, Mr. Dr. O. But it just, what if?
Yeah.
And of course, the pragmatism tells me that they've invested so much into that. You think about the NDB, the
National Development
Bank, how much money they invest.
Yeah.
China put in a lot of capital.
Absolutely.
I wrote about it in my Russia book, They're not going to walk away from this. But on the other hand, they're going to have some mechanisms by which, if those countries, their members are not willing to support that particular policy to move BRICS from the shackles of the US financial dominance, then they need to figure something out, either establish another one or do a vote, whatever. Whatever the case might be, they need to figure this out. And now we're coming to that point where you start seeing, as I said again, for the case of Vladimir Putin, I understand why he's not attending.
Yeah.
But for President Xi Jinping, you start to, optics matters, guys. Yeah. Optics matters.
Oh, hugely so.
Yeah.
It's New Development Bank. Sorry, I strayed you wrong.
Yeah.
It's New Development Bank. But
now, speaking of that, while I'm thinking about it, I saw a tweet from my dear friend Richard Turn. You remember?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to share the link with you guys. And wanted to tie back to your point about the dollar. Here is what he wrote again. UBS helps its client to de-dollarize with alternative non-dollar store of value. I found it very, very, very interesting, because the statements, the report says, and I quote, "We expect the erosion of a confidence in U.S. policymaking will see the U.S. dollar depreciate over the medium term." Now, the key things that I am going to raise for you, as Richard did, is the Asia market. And that brings back your point about ASEAN.
About ASEAN.
So that is why when you guys think, like we always say, nothing happens in the vacuum when it comes down to geopolitics. If you look at the statements of the prime minister or of the head of the Singapore, Mr. Wang, what was it? Where is his first trip is going to be? China. Yeah.
Well, so
loud and clear.
Let's talk about this for a second, because let's look at ASEAN. It's very interesting because ASEAN is sort of cautiously supporting BRICS while also kind of not trying to take sides, which is quite frankly probably the right place for them to be.
They can be holding that forever.
Maybe.
You know why? You know why? They just can't. And I don't see them holding this forever.
Yeah.
They're going to have to make a decision. And it became clear with the upcoming trip of Mr. Wang to China. That's the loud and clear and silent message to the Americans.
Also, I just wanted to share this really quick back to gold. I know we just moved off gold, but this is the top gold producing countries in the world. So China is actually the #1 top gold producing country in the world. And this is from the Times, their business section. So China's #1 and Russia's #2.
Wow.
So they, I don't know what percentage they keep versus sell, but they Canada is pretty high up there, and then Canada and the U.S. Canada will sell its gold to the United States if the U.S. wants it, even. And then
does Canada have a choice?
They might sell it.
I'm joking.
Because the United States is not amassing gold. And so that's actually one of the biggest problems is the United States is not, although the US has the most by far right now, that if you're not continuing to grow and your competitors are continuing to grow, it's a problem, right?
But that gold doesn't belong to us. Consider that Germany, consider Saudi Arabia, consider other countries whose gold is here.
So they are actually starting to repatriate their gold. So other countries, after watching, the United States, when Biden tried to take Russia's assets, when Biden seized Russia's assets and then threatened to sell them to fund the Ukraine war, all of a sudden it was maybe one of the worst choices the US has made financially, and there have been many in the recent past, because it let other countries know that all of a sudden the United States was not dependable, and it was not a dependable custodian of the gold and the assets that it had access to. And it's what really sparked and fueled what we're seeing right now with BRICS. I think, quite frankly, if the US hadn't done that, I don't think that the BRICS countries would be so dedicated to having a different currency and different payment processing.
But even with that, there are no guarantees regarding BRICS, because I personally cannot trust India, because India could hold up the process, the progress of that particular policy towards the end of it. Look what they did when the conversation came up a year and a half ago. And I remember we mentioned this, when they blocked the assumption of creating a currency that is backed by the dollar. They already voiced their opposition to it back then. And it was nothing. It was just a conversation. That's why I can't trust India. We never trust India, because it's playing both sides. And to me, once again, it's my personal opinion. I have seen that India is the weak link in BRICS. I've seen it back then. I'm still holding I'm still convinced with my assertion.
Well, and David, what do you think about, honestly, India is not that big of a player in the payment system and in the currency and in the gold. It's just not. It doesn't. Let me go back to, if you look here, I'm not even sure it's on this list of top gold producing. Where is it?
It will have to be in the bottom somewhere, but
it's I don't even see it.
India. No, it's not there.
Yeah, guys, can you see India? I don't see it. There's a lot of things here.
Well,
I don't see it.
In any event, India's role as I said, when I think about what just took place between Iran and Israel, it exposed the hollowness of India's policy, even though India doesn't have.
But that's what I'm saying is I don't don't know that India is like a big player in this.
Yeah, but it could hinder the progress of BRICS,
see.
and that's where my fear has always been.
Sure.
You know, when I started to
You
pay
share this
close
instead.
attention to this, I've started to really zoom in, because I
Yeah.
did the research when I wrote the Russia book. I addressed the new development bank in detail. It's one of those pages there when I talked about Russia and China's relations, but I brought in BRICS into the conversation regarding that. I wish I would have taken an excerpt from the book, but anyway, and when I start to dig deeper into that understanding, it started to become clear to me, you know, we're gonna be, I was seeing a problem on the horizon regarding the progress of BRICS, because it's gonna be hindered by the opposition of some member of sort. And I couldn't think of any other country more so than India. That will be that sore thumb, if I may use the term, that's going to be impeding the progress of BRICS. And of course, it works to the US advantage to do so. But the recent conflict, once again, between Iran and Israel, exposed now India, because now the US just gave the middle finger to India. You know how? Is by hosting the head of the military, the Pakistani military in the White House. So I'm going to be talking about this.
There's some very interesting political theater going on.
Right now. And you think about, when you think about countries like, for example, Bhutan, you think about Nepal, you think about Bangladesh, why is India controlling those countries? Why doesn't let them be? Because the fear of those countries, especially Bhutan, if you only, people have no idea about the role Bhutan plays in that part of the world, but India has more direct involvement in it. That's why they were preventing any further talks between Bhutan and China. India does not want any of those three, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, to have any ties with China. But the diplomatic ties between Bhutan and China move forward. So because China is able to build infrastructure that's going to bypass the Indian market, so they don't need it. So but India is looking at it from that perspective. So, and also because they are doing our own bidding. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about the recent statements by the Dalai Lama, right?
I
know.
No, go ahead.
I know. Well, it's just my point, and I know it's not our topic to talk about this time. It's just to highlight to you the big picture. That if we can at least keep sinking our claws in that part of the world through, for example, the likes of India, then India will do our dirty work, and and that's it.
Well, and so fundamentally, okay, and I also have here, I mean, the IMF is certainly not my favorite organization, guys. If you've been watching, you know how I feel about the IMF and what it's done. But according to the IMF, sort of these are percent of a world GDP based on purchasing power parity, PPP, and share of the world. So what I really wanted to highlight here, David, because you were talking about it, was percentage of GDP based on PPP. So right now, if you're looking at, so here's 2025, this green arrow here, or this green line here, is the G7. So the G7 sort in the 80s had 51%. Okay. But it's been in steady decline since then. And then if you look right here, here's China, in the 80s, it had a very, very small share, but it's actually much further along than the United States right now. So the United States, where are you? The United States is actually right now at 14.75%. So it's right here. And that's actually now much lower than the 19.68% that China has. So if you're looking at the G7 countries, they only have 28.43%.
Wow.
Whereas if you look at, so all of these, it's kind of interesting because they have The IMF doesn't have a BRICS, doesn't have a group of BRICS. So I had to add I had to manually add these up. So forgive me if my math is not exact, but I think it is. And so they're at 39.67, so almost 40%. So we have almost 30% versus almost 40%. And I'm including the like new countries that were just added, but I mean, they're so small that they don't move the needle a ton. But it is interesting right now that we are looking at such, I mean, a 10% difference, it's more than a 10% difference, is actually really substantial. And, even the difference between China's 19.68% and the United States 14.75%, that's actually a very substantial difference. Yeah. And so I think it's very important. If you look at India is 8.53. So it's not nothing. I mean, that is a contributor, but it's certainly nothing compared to China or the US,
I would never put India and China on the same side.
No. And they're not. There is
no comparison whatsoever.
But
economically speaking, that's what we're talking about here. So
right.
It's we'll keep our focus on exactly what matters. And what matters is just, on the global stage with the multipolar order, it's China is playing a role into that. Russia is playing a role into that, even though some are now questioning the role of Russia regarding its global aspects when it didn't show up when it matters for Iran.
Yeah.
And that's brought really some questions to the fore, and rightly so. You're going to have to ask these questions. But a lot of people do not know that the Russian Jew inside the Kremlin do have an influence.
I'm not surprised
very
that piece of information.
So that is, I want to, if you allow me, just show this picture.
Sure.
Check this out. Check this picture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Makes you just wonder. And this is why, I go back earlier to my point about what India doing the roles, because Dalai Lama's headquarters is where? It's in India.
Yeah.
So it just so makes you just wonder, what is a monk doing at the wall? What for? So
all the world's a stage, guys. All the world's a stage.
Yeah. It makes you just wonder. And
well, it was.
I didn't see any Chinese going to the wall.
Yes.
Makes you wonder. Wonder. So.
It's even if you look at language, right? People play this off, but it's called political theater. It's called the theater of war, right?
Wow.
That, right? You were in my husband and I were talking about this is 4th of July and, it's, patriotic and all of that, which, he said it and it hit me. I was like, the theater of war.
Yeah. And this is exactly where things are. And that's why I'm saying for BRICS, really to make a dent on the global stage, it has to sort out its own internal dynamics.
For sure. Unquestionably.
To sort out your it's like, think of it like, guys, like a family, when you have disarray and chaos inside a family, do you think that family is going to be any cohesive?
Sure.
No, till you sort out what those issues are and put things on the dots or in their spot, as we say, nothing's gonna move smoothly and there will be no
I think, quite frankly, the reality that both China and Russia understand is that unless they become the more attractive choice, countries are not going to choose them. So the countries that are really choosing them at this moment are the countries that have been isolated by the United States. You look at Iran, which is we just saw what happened, right? So these are countries that have more or less been exiled or isolated by the United States. So the more countries the United States sanctions and the more countries the United States makes an enemy, there's nowhere else for them to go but BRICS. And so right now, you don't have the United States being a non-attractive option economically. You don't. The United States is still an attractive option economically. And I know a lot of people are very rightfully angry at the United States. Probably the US people should be more angry at the United States than anyone else on the planet. But a lot of the foreign policy of the United States has been really quite bad for a long time. And that's an understatement of the century. But economically, the United States is still attractive. And so, and China and Russia are becoming more attractive. And so that's what and China's done this in a very smart way, is they've become economically more attractive. Over the years, they've become unbelievably economically more attractive. And you're looking at the BRI, you're looking at, building infrastructure in developing countries. And so China is doing something very, very smart. But I think Trump is doing a very odd thing with tariffs. He's starting to make enemies of people.
Yeah.
And I think he is attempting to stop stuff like the BRICS from trying to de-dollarize, right? That may be what he's attempting to do. But the more the United States economically alienates everybody else, the more
most countries are going to move forward with that. So.
Well, because they don't have anywhere else to go. If you look at this, there's no other country that even comes close to where the rest of this is. I mean, even the EU at their 14%, that's all of the EU. That's not just one country. So there's nowhere that compares to the United States economically.
Yeah, and for Trump, funny, it was just an article this morning about a survey was conducted in the US. 40% want an independent party right now. Because that's what Elon Musk said yesterday.
Yeah.
He said and he can afford to establish one, but
I don't know that he'd be a good.
No, he's not. No, Musk is for Musk, And you look at that, and this is why, interesting enough that prior to the attacks by Israel on Iran, Starlinks was turned off. So makes you just wonder. This is why the Iranians went ahead and dumped the GPS altogether. I'll be doing a live stream on this tomorrow, guys.
Super interesting topic.
Yeah, the Iranians dumped the GPS and moved every operations to Beirut.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we don't trust our large corporations. We don't trust Elon Musk and Starlink. I mean,
here's the link, guys, in the chat box for tomorrow. So I'll be addressing this really from a geopolitical aspect. So, but just my point. And one of them was what Musk said. Well, we need to have an independent party. So 40% at least of.
Oh, absolutely. I think we should have certainly a third party. Certainly, I think a lot of our problems would go away if we actually had a third party.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that the two parties have kept themselves two parties. Is because it's two sides of the same coin.
It was set up that way. The founding fathers set it up that way, by the way, guys. This is nothing new. Like I always say, when I used to teach at the university, I'll tell students and they'll just stare at me like, what are you saying, Dr. O? They couldn't believe what I'm saying. And I said, the system has been controlled for the last 150 years. You only have two options between Republicans and Democrats. You get the Republicans, even the senator from Texas here, Ted Cruz, which, by the way, doesn't represent me at all, as corrupted as he gets in the pockets of the APEC. Same with Tom Cotton, same with Lindsey Graham, same with others as well. But those three are the main vocals of we need to defend Israel, we need to do this, we need to do that. Why? I don't know. So just because, and it's just my point, guys. This is just to highlight to you the big picture. When you think about BRICS within this context of what's taking place around the world, the alternatives are out there, except that the alternatives are not as clear as we can even see it because
not yet
that internal dynamics. Till BRICS sort out that internal dynamics, And again, I don't see the reason why they shouldn't have the ability to vote out a member.
Well, and they might eventually.
I couldn't find anything in their charters pertaining to this. I couldn't find anything. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe it was just the way it was set up.
But the thing is,
you cannot vote out a founding member.
Here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
That's the Chinese way has been using the carrot, not the stick, on the global economy in the global stage. And so that's why I think it's very possible.
Yeah, but if you go with something like this vis-a-vis the BRICS, you're going to be saying to yourself, well, is China's going to be catering to the weak? No,
I don't know. I don't know.
To me, I look at it like a military unit. Are you going to be catered to somebody who's so weak in the unit? because it's going to drag the entire unit. So what do? You give the option to the guy, get it together or get out.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
But the thing is, on the world stage in economics, it's not as simple as that.
I agree.
Right?
It's different. It's different.
That may be the right move. But in that case, like, let's say we're talking about India.
Yeah.
In that case, who's India going to go to? If you cut India off, they're going straight to the United States.
Well, they can go. What they're going to get from the Americans? The Americans are going to use them anyway. Do you think the US is going to give them any? Remember, India's been asking for certain advance. I was aware of this during my time in Washington. They were asking for certain type of advanced weapons.
Yeah.
And we said behind closed doors, heck no, you ain't going to get that. That's why they won with the Russians. That is why they won with the Russians. And now they've been exposed, especially after the Pakistanis shut down the Rafale fighter jets, which is considered an advance, not as advanced as others, but it's still. The Chinese weapons was a bit, and that's why Pakistan came at the top. And the Americans looked at this and said, you know what? We better reach out to Pakistan. Forget about India. And that's exactly what happened. So what India's going to do? Yeah, it's going to fall back to the US. We're going to tap their shoulders and say, good job.
Well, but that's the thing is right now they're leaving doors. Everyone is leaving some back channels open. Everybody is leaving things open. So and I don't think they would cut any, quite frankly, that does not seem to be China and Russia's style. They do not seem to just cut people off. The United States does that. That's what the sanctions are about. That's what, all of that is about, especially with the countries that are now in BRICS. That's true. Is they cut them all off, but that doesn't seem to be Russia and China's plan.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see how it shapes up. I'm curious to see if anything comes out of this BRICS summit. But like I said, the important parts of the summit of BRICS are not happening during the summit. They're happening all the time.
Well, it will be interesting when we do the ASEAN topic. We'll visit the final communique of this summit when it concludes on the 7th, and we'll just report back to you on that. Anyway, guys, please make sure if this is your first time here, I will greatly appreciate if you can subscribe to the channel. And guys, please hit the like and share the video with others. And we greatly appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.